Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Adietis. This episode of Nos Adietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Adietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nicola Dero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going good!
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
And Porter says, cheated!
You wanna win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Adietis. This is the Mailbag episode. We are recording on June 4th. We had the weekend off, so no new games to talk about. We already did the RSL episode, and the big news that has happened in the meantime is I finally released the interview that I did with Adrian Hanauer. It was done about 10 days ago. It was released, so it was already a week old by the time I did it, but I think it held up okay. I don't know, Aaron, what were your impressions of that interview? Did you learn anything from that interview?
I think that Adrian is extremely good at saying a lot and also making it kind of difficult to parse what he's saying without it seeming that way at first, maybe.
Yeah.
I think that based on similar interviews in the past, all of the things he said about player acquisition were encouraging to me. I think that a lot of people wanted him to come out and say, we are committed to doing XYZ, and he is just not going to do that. But right. I mean, I feel like very shortly before the Sounders went out and got Raul Ruidiaz at a time when a lot of people were insisting, oh, they're not going to do it. They're not going to go sign another DP. This is just the way the team is now. Adrian said, I really like our team and I think we can compete. And then a week later, they signed Raul Ruidiaz. And I just think a lot of his comments were similar. And it's, there have been other windows where it was similar things where he's not the type of guy to throw anybody under the bus. He's certainly not going to say anything to undermine the players or say anything about negative about them.
Yeah.
So he's always going to say he likes the roster, but I don't know. I think he was sending very positive signals about, what they intend to do over the next couple of windows. I'm nervous.
He seems to understand. I will say he didn't run away from the enormity of the Club World Cup.
Yes.
And, that's around the corner. And, ultimately the proof is going to be in, does he go out and give the green light to make some signings? I think we'd all like to see something happen this summer. I would say he gave enough to allow for that hope. He obviously stopped well short of promising some big acquisition in the summer, but he didn't dismiss it either.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. I think that if it's something that wasn't feasible for one reason or another, that feels like the kind of thing he's going to allude more strongly towards. I don't think he's ever going to say that, but I think that he wants to set expectations, right? He wants to set them, and he wants to set them lower, I think, generally than.
He is a big time. Garth used to say that he was a big under promise, over deliver guy.
Yep.
And I would say that's even more true for Adrian. I don't know if you've ever actually used that term with me, but he is notoriously been really, like if something is likely going to get done, but he he's not sure, he'll say it's 50-50.
Yeah.
But if it's, if it's basically done, then he'll say he feels pretty good about it,
Right.
that kind of thing. And, that was sort of the vibe I got when he was talking about hosting Club World Cup games, which I do think is a big factor too, because hosting the Club World Cup games is money. It's money. It's, these are potentially high revenue games that they can sell. And that's money that presumably can go back into the acquisition budget. And if you're playing home games, that's even more reason to want to put your best foot forward. And it's not about, and I think he actually did an okay job articulating this. It's not about building a roster that's going to go toe to toe or dollar to dollar with Man City. Like, that's not going to happen, right? They're not going to, but it's not about going toe to toe with Man City. It's about finishing second in your group and getting into the knockout stage and just seeing how far you can advance. Like, no one's expecting the Sounders to win this thing, but if they can win 2 or 3 games and be better than the Asian or African teams in their group, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, right? You want to be able to go toe to toe with the teams you should conceivably be able to go toe to toe with.
Right.
You want to give yourself a puncher's chance against everyone else, and crazy stuff can happen in a knockout stage. So if you can just get to the knockout stage, like you said, nobody is expecting the Sounders to win this competition, to get lucky enough times that they pick up a trophy. But if you can win one game in the knockout stage, you've got to feel pretty good about that. And it's just about setting yourself up to do that, I think, in a way that's not fiscally irresponsible, right? That doesn't mean you have to be as responsible as you would at a different time, right? Like, I think you have to understand that this is an opportunity to maybe stretch yourself a little from where you would be comfortable just for a normal acquisition, because there is a pretty great opportunity here to do something special. But you also can't go crazy for this one competition. And I think that that's a very reasonable position. If it just means spending 5 to 10% more than you would, I'm pulling that number out of thin air, right? That seems reasonable to me, right? Like, that seems like a reasonable stretch for how special this competition is and how exciting of an opportunity it could be.
Right. I mean, this has been, this is even more than the Club World Cup that they have already competed in. This is really closer to what they had envisioned someday being a part of, when, from the minute they kicked a ball in MLS, this was sort of the destination that they were aiming towards. And if you can put, it's not about showing Man City that you can go toe to toe with them. It's about just, being competitive. And I think it's a great opportunity. He seems to appreciate that. That was probably the biggest thing that I got out of the interview, was just his, his grasp of his appreciation for the moment, right? I guess, as far as that goes. And there was, plenty of other stuff that I'm sure people will like and not like. And, I can understand why some people were not completely satisfied with the answers. I can understand why some people might not have been satisfied with the questions, that I could have gone harder on him, that he could have been more specific. These are all things that I will not try to defend either way here, but I thought overall there was more there, I think, than I originally thought.
Yeah, I think that he's a guy who multiple readings, might benefit. Yeah, might benefit people, because he's very careful about what he says, but I also don't think he's opposed to leaving rabbit trails.
Yeah.
He's a smart guy.
Yeah, and we can, and at some point we probably should do a deeper dive into the whole. He had a fair amount to say about building a stadium at Longacres and sort of all that goes into that, and we talked about the challenges and opportunities at Lumen Field, and I honestly don't have a better sense of where that's going to go. I think until we know otherwise, it feels like the most likely outcome is that the Sounders figure out a way to stay at Lumen Field. And I think that's probably my preferred outcome.
Yeah.
But I can also appreciate why they feel like they need to explore this possibility. And frankly, they would be doing a disservice. I will say that. I think they would be doing themselves a disservice. I think they'd be doing the legacy of the club a disservice if they didn't at least go through a proper vetting process of, can this work at, like, is there a way that we can build something good enough to overcome the challenges, and realistically, how do we go about tackling those challenges? That's a good thought exercise. And who knows, maybe I'll be proven wrong and that's a better option. But I still think you're going to have you have a big hill to climb to improve on Lumen Field, if only because of the location. It's such a perfect location.
Yeah.
They often say that, real estate's about location, and that's what Lumen Field has. And it would feel, it's going to take a lot, I think, for the Sounders to convince themselves that they need to, spend probably close to $1 billion. Let's not forget.
Right. Yeah.
That's what stadiums cost these days. Speaking of which, did you see that Charlotte FC is talking about doing an $800 million renovation to Bank of America Stadium? Well, I guess Charlotte FC isn't doing it. It's the Carolina Panthers. But they're planning on doing an $800 million renovation. And effectively all they're doing is wrapping the stadium. They're not putting a roof on it. I gotta assume they're gonna put better, they'll put video boards and stuff, but it's basically the same stadium with a new wrapper.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. I mean, I think in a lot of ways that is better than tearing it down. And
sure,
like I'm pro reusing as much as we can.
It's just a lot of money as well.
It's an insane amount of money. It is,
and they're not even putting a roof on it, which is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, it gets pretty hot there, right? in North Carolina.
I would think every stadium in the world would do better with a a canopy type of roof.
Yeah, you would think so. It's pretty nuts. It's definitely eye-opening, when you see these projects, and like I think a Sounders specific stadium would be, I mean, by the time they get around a building, it'd probably be more than that. But it's not going to be as extensive as an NFL stadium, but it's also going to be a greenfield development, and that's going to add costs. So it's pretty crazy. I wouldn't want to be making the decisions. I think the analysis would be interesting, but I would not want to be the one in charge of deciding what to do with the analysis, because it's, we don't need to get too deep into it, but there are a lot of pluses and there are a lot of minuses, and that's a tough needle to thread, I think.
It is. I will say one thing I wish they had done, just frankly, from a content perspective, for my selfish reasons. It's like, but if you're going to talk about it, like, release the renderings. They gotta have renderings out there, right?
Yeah. I do,
because it's like, it makes it so much easier for, I think, a fan to wrap their mind around like what this could be if they can see the vision,
right?
And they're pitching this idea that it's, because right now you look at we're going down a rabbit hole a little bit here, but you're looking at Long Acres, and Long Acres is a, what was the term that the urbanists use? It's a lightly used semi-industrial, office park, essentially. Right. And it's hard to envision that being anything like a neighborhood or a gathering place or anything. It's just hard to imagine it being anything. But, the idea is they're going to build 3,000 apartments there. There's going to be, presumably restaurants and music. There's going to be a music venue. That's another thing that Adrian talked about. And once you start putting all that stuff in there, maybe that changes it. But then if you plot, but you show us where the stadium's going to be, and like you show us that roof, and you show us 30,000 fans or whatever packed into this, one of the biggest soccer specific stadiums in the United States, and I don't know, you could maybe get people excited. But that's the thing, is like they're 8 years out at best,
right? Yeah,
you don't want to burn too brightly too early.
And a lot of this is why I feel like the most likely explanation for them making noise about the stadium is a game theory type deal, where you have to think that like when they bought Longacres, there were all these detailed plans. None of them included a stadium. Like it wasn't talked about, it wasn't mentioned. People speculated about it, right? But you feel like if it were a possibility, they would have mentioned, like a serious possibility they were strongly considering. They would have at least dropped a hint or mentioned a possibility, right? And so I think it's not a shock that we started hearing rumblings of this around the same time that we started hearing similar rumblings that they were having some frustrations with first and goal.
Right. Yeah.
I think there's a direct relationship. That doesn't mean that they're not seriously considering these things and running the numbers. And like you said, they would be remiss if they didn't do it. It would just be foolish not to do it, as opposed as I am to the idea. They owe it to themselves, as a club, as a business entity, whatever. And they have a lot of real estate in an area that's relatively attractive, I would imagine, for some kinds of development. If they're not going to use it to build a stadium, probably better to figure that out sooner than later, so you can figure out what you want to do with that investment. So
right. And so anyway, interesting stuff in there. I would say if that you are a listener of this podcast and you haven't listened to that interview, I think you'd probably find it interesting, and I would suggest going to go listen to it. And with all that said, this is a mailbag episode, Aaron.
Yeah.
Why don't we go ahead and start answering some mailbag questions?
Sounds good. So this first one is from Boomstick315, and I will mention that it was asked before the RSL game. I still think the spirit of the question holds true, though, so we'll go ahead and ask it. The Sounders have been on a pretty good run. Short of winning a trophy, how would the rest of the season have to go for the club's assessment of the squad to have been correct? As in, it really was the injuries and some bad luck that got the season off to such a bad start.
I don't know that the RSL game changes the tenor of the question much. Like I think you could still talk yourself into this being a pretty good run. They're 4-1-4 across all competitions in their last 9. That's not as good as we want them to be. But if you had told me a month ago that they were going to go 4-1-4 in this stretch and not told me where the wins came from and that they were still alive in the Open Cup, I think I would have probably taken that. But where does this team need to get in order to feel like their assessment was correct? I think they got to be top 4 in the West.
Yeah.
They got to compete for a trophy. And those are both attainable things. If they win the Open Cup, that won't really color their assessment of the roster. I don't think that's a almost separate discussion. But if they win the Open Cup, it's going to feel like a reasonably successful season, right there. And if they finish top 4 in the West, I don't know. Like I think that would prove their calculations correct.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me would be that they have to start. They don't have to become like a crazy offensive juggernaut, but they have to start scoring goals consistently. It would be nice.
It would be nice.
But I think that they have to be a little better than, I think, 4th worst in MLS in terms of goals scored, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Because the whole equation, right, even when talking about the downside of the team, was they're not going to set the world on fire, but they'll score enough goals to be respectable offensively. And they have not done that. And I think obviously missing De La Vega is a huge part of that. Missing Chu has been a part of it. But I do think that they need to start getting some goals from the guys they have, even before the summer window, I think, for me to think that they didn't miss something pretty major with the attack.
It's a crazy thing. I'm just realizing this now. Charlotte FC has 7 wins from 18 goals scored and 18 goals allowed. The Sounders have 4 wins from 19 goals scored and 19 allowed. It is kind of it's been a weird season.
I still think that, and this is kind of, I think, at the heart of the question to some degree, the Sounders have not been good. I don't think anybody is arguing that the Sounders have been good. They have been hellaciously unlucky. And a team like Charlotte has been quite lucky.
Yeah.
And I think those things can both be true, right? I think that those are both totally reasonable positions.
Totally. All right, this is from Ty. Has Seattle ever won after a Rusnak free kick goal? He should stop scoring them.
Yeah, I can't recall a game where they did. They may have.
I think he only has one other goal, and that was the Orlando game that they lost 3-2 famously on a late goal.
He's pretty good from dead ball situations, but I definitely don't think of him as he's not Andreas Ivanchitz, right? Like, or Nico Ladero.
No, he might have one other one.
Well, they're not showing up in Who Scored, so.
Well, phooey. All right. Well,
we give up.
We're going to say, fast forward, we're now here. I think the answer is no. That's what I think the answer is.
Yeah, I think so. It's spiritually no.
It's spiritually no. There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
You're up. All right. Next one is from Scott Chupak. How much of the fans' malaise has been specifically due to how boring and disappointing it has been to attend Sounders home games the last couple of seasons, as opposed to the team actually being bad?
I think a lot. I actually think a lot. I think that the performance at home, specifically the lack of goals at home, is the maybe number one culprit for the malaise, because so many fans have gone to games and gone home frustrated, or unimpressed, or whatever. And I think one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy is when people say they've been bad since they won the Champions League. First of all, they were actually pretty good right after Champions League. And it's funny to go back and think about this, because I was listening to Extra Time today, and they were talking about how, well, the crew aren't going to have this. The crew aren't going to have a post CCL slump because they're already really high up in the table or whatever. Like, they're already they're fourth in the table. This is not a team that's going to collapse. That's exactly what we were saying in 2022.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if people remember this, but at one point the Sounders were like very much in the Supporter Shield race up until they weren't, which was like if you look at what their record was after that win against Toronto, which was almost the exact midway point of the season, but more importantly was like 2 whole months after they won Champions League. Like, right after they win Champions League, they go win, loss, win, draw, win, loss, win.
Yeah.
Like, they were flying.
Yeah, they were great coming. I mean, I remember talking on this show about how clear it was that their struggles were related to CCL.
Yeah, because after that win against Toronto, they were 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 6, and 3 or something like that. And I remember at one point saying something along the lines of, I would be more surprised if they missed the playoffs than if they won the Supporter Shield. I thought they were much more likely to win the support. Like, they weren't totally in the Supporter Shield race, but they were close enough to the Supporter Shield race that it seemed like a reasonable goal.
Yeah.
And they obviously missed the play. They fell apart. They completely fell apart from that point forward. They only won 5 more games the rest of the season, and they fell apart. But I just think it's sometimes interesting to remember that the Sounders season did not start. I just think it's worth reminding everyone, the season did not start to fall apart as soon as they won Champions League. Like, right. They actually looked really good coming coming out of Champions League.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also 2023, right? Yes, there was a long bad stretch in the middle.
Right.
And,
but their overall were pretty decent.
Right. And the first, I think, 8 games until the Portland game, they were the best MLS team I've ever seen. And that was a long time ago. I'm not saying that means that they're going to get back to that, but they were scoring goals like crazy. I think that they had like a plus 15 goal difference in 7 games or something like that. Their defense was elite. They were scoring goals like crazy. And that was, more recently than the CCL. So I'm with you. I know it seems pedantic, but
through the 7th at game 7 of last year, they had outscored their opponents 15-3.
Okay. So plus 12 through 7 games.
They were dominant. They were looking like one of the best teams in MLS history. And they obviously didn't finish quite that strongly, but there was a lot going right. Was a lot going right. And so, I tend to think that the reason that we think the Sounders have been bad is a lot more to do with their home performance than anything else, frankly.
Yeah. And I think their home performance and also the way that they have won games is, not the way necessarily people want to win games, which I totally get. Like the aesthetics are soccer's entertainment, right? And when you're not kind of boring soccering your way to the Supporter Shield or MLS Cup, it's not quite as cute. And the Sounders, didn't necessarily look like they were going to do that until pretty late in the season last year. So I get it. Like, I think they're playing.
And I don't want to, I'm not offering this as people are wrong for saying that I'm not so much saying that. I just think that the Malaise, they've been really bad at home, all things considered. I think that's more what I want to focus on is that their home performances have been horrible relative to the rest of everything else they've been doing. And they have 1 home win this year. They've scored in 3 of 7 games.
They've won 8 of their last, they played 7 at home this year. So 8 of their last 24 at home.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's really bad. Yeah, I mean, I for
and
sure.
That's going to have an effect. That's going to, that's what most people's experience is right. Watching this team at home.
Yeah.
And if you're consistently delivering a bad product, people are going to get frustrated.
Yep.
All right. This is, I don't know if you really want to answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. The list wants to know, why has Craig not had a press conference? Right now, it feels like he is hiding and does not want to face the music. I know this is not a valid point, but feelings don't need to be valid to be real.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave the maybe more technical explanation for you. But I do agree with the last point that feelings don't need to be valid to be real. I think that there were frustrations at times with Garth for being less available during difficult times, but he also had a track record. I think during 2016, before the Nico signing, when things were pretty rough, there were people that wanted Garth fired and were furious that he hadn't spoke more and that he wasn't giving answers to questions that people wanted to hear. So it's not like it's unprecedented, but I think that the lack of track record with the Sounders was probably part of that. I think for a lot of Sounders fans, they went from the heights of 2014 to a good but not great season in 2015 to, looking like they were going to miss the playoffs, Ziggy getting fired from the time Garth showed up, right? And so, and then obviously he showed people why that he deserved a little bit more benefit of the doubt. Craig has not done that. And I I've said on here before that I don't put a ton of blame on Craig Weibel for the state of the roster and for the struggles the Sounders are having right now, just because I think his hands were tied in a lot of ways. I think a lot of the decisions he's made that have turned out poorly have been defensible and reasonable, and he's just had some pretty bad luck. But I do think that it is frustrating that it doesn't seem like we hear from him a lot. That being said, he is there is a, I think, 4-part interview series, right, that Jackson Feltz is doing with him that's airing in parts currently on KJR, correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm not gonna. Yes, that is true. That interview was conducted at this point a month ago, I want to say, and frankly, I've been trying to get, like, I don't have a good answer for why he hasn't held a press conference. I have been kind of trying to get an interview with Craig. I think I have one soon, so that's different than a press conference. And I don't know, I guess the answer to why he hasn't had a press conference the last time he did talk after the Arriaga trade, and traditionally they don't hold, like, GMs don't have press conferences unless there's something specifically to talk about. And so I don't necessarily blame him for not having a press conference. And I suppose I might be somewhat to blame too, in terms of me not getting access to Craig, because I haven't been really pushing it that hard, in part because every time, like, it only gets, there's only more things to talk about,
right,
by waiting, right? And so I have this kind of running list of things I want to talk about him, and I suppose at some point the list becomes too long and I'll never get to everything I want to talk to him about. But hopefully we're gonna get to him soon. I don't blame anyone for feeling this way. I don't even know if it's an invalid reason. I think it's fair to be frustrated. Like, the people are frustrated with the performance and they want to hear from the people who made the decisions that put them here.
Yeah.
And that's a perfectly valid thing to want. I'm not trying to tell anyone they shouldn't want that. I want to talk to him too. I don't know how many good answers he has right now, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't hear from him. So,
right. Yep. All right. Next one is from Sounder Pilot. Ever since the CCL win, the offense has been lacking. This also coincided with Nico's regression and eventual departure. Was Nico the glue that was holding the offense together? And without that type of player, are our current players incapable of mounting an effective offense? It sure seems that way.
I don't think it's an entirely unfair accusation or conclusion. I do think up until last year, a lot of this team was sort of let Nico cook was sort of the offense.
Yeah.
I think last year, part of why I was more bullish on their performance last year than a lot of people was because they did a lot of work to move away from our offense is effectively just get the ball to the creative guys and let the creative guys make something happen. And last year there seemed to be a little bit more of a system, and they've kept to that system. They just have not performed as well within. I was expecting them to take more of a step forward this year within that system, and that does not seem to have happened, in part because I think a lot of the pieces that they needed to raise that bar have not been able to do that for one reason or another. I think Jordan has had somewhat of a regression. Christian has not come back to his pre-injury self yet. João Paulo is not the player that he was, at one point. Raul Ruiz, we don't necessarily need to get into this too deeply because we've already done this a few times. Our feelings on Raul as a starting number 9 should be well known at this point. You can kind of go down that list, and no one has really. Albert Rusnak has not taken nearly as big of a step forward as I thought he would be. So I don't think it is I don't think the system. I am not as down on the system as much as I am. Like, you're always going to be relying on your best players to perform at a certain level in order for the team to reach a certain level. And I don't know. I just don't. I don't see that right now. I don't think this is. I think this is more a personnel problem than a system problem.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. I think that there are things that the Sounders could be doing tactically to take better advantage of the talent that they do have and suit the players that they do have a little bit better. But I think ultimately that they have to get better performances especially from their creative players and their attacking players. Like, I have no faults with the Sounders, how they've done in possession or defensively. It's just the final third that's been the problem. And part of the issue, right, is that like soccer is a holistic game. Like, if you change the attacking system, you're also changing the defensive system. You're changing the way you approach possession and how the midfield is supposed to do things. It's very fluid. And I understand why, when they've had so much success in 2/3 of the game, why they don't want to do anything too drastic to, affect the final third of the game, literally and figuratively. It's a tough issue to figure out, obviously, because it's been the better part of a calendar year now trying to figure it out. But I don't think that the amount of regression we've seen and underachievement that we've seen was reasonable to expect by the coaching staff or by the by the front office.
And I'll add, in case it wasn't clear, it's not that I think that the coaches are doing a perfect job. I just think that the coaches' issues. The issues I have more with the coaches is their personnel selection.
Yeah, for sure.
Than the tactical approach.
Right. And I think too, there's nuance within tactical systems, right? The overall system, I think, could be plenty successful. I think that they can have success playing the way that they are trying to play, but there are elements of it that they're not doing well. And I think, that it's that kind of stuff. Those are the finer points of coaching anyway, right? Like saying go out there and play 4-3-3 and do it possession, do that, or do counterattacking. Like, that's the easy part, right? It's the figuring out how to effectively do that that's difficult.
All right, this is from Ken W. Could loyalty be our Achilles heel? Is Brian too loyal to his players / is ownership perhaps too loyal to our coaching staff?
I think, we've talked about Brian's proclivities in this department before, and I think it's reasonable to say that we both feel like maybe that's one of his shortcomings. I'll definitely say it for myself. I think it's a very common shortcoming for a coach.
I would agree. I think there's some element to that. I definitely think Brian is a little too loyal. I think maybe Adrian is maybe too. I think we've talked about this before, but I think it's hard to parse where building a club culture becomes too loyal.
Yeah.
Like, part of building a club culture is having people from the club continuing to populate positions within the club, right? And you can over-index there, though, because you do need some fresh voices.
Yeah.
And if you look around the front office, there's a lot of people who came in who had a connection for one reason or another, and that's part of what makes the Sounders feel different than every other club in the country, frankly. But it can also be, you still need to refresh that. And I've started to come around on the idea that maybe the biggest problem with the Sounders roster right now is not that the individual parts are bad. It's that equation has been thrown off, that there's not been enough new blood injected into the team at the top of the roster. Like, if you look at the roster right now and you compare it to the roster that won the 2022 Champions League, virtually everyone from that game is still on the team.
Yeah.
Except for basically Javier Arriaga. Yeah. But like, the only new starter is Jackson Reagan. He was on that team. Obed Vargas, he was on that. He played a significant role in that game. You can kind of go down, and Nico Ladero is the only real significant departure from that team. And it's not that all those players are bad now, but I just think that there's some kind of hard to quantify element of, you just sort of need you need new players that are doing, and that's what Pedro de la Vega was supposed to be this year, I'll note.
Yeah.
And that just hasn't worked out for one reason or another. But
I was talking to a friend of mine that I went to the RSL game with before the game on the way there, and he's a season ticket holder, but he goes to far fewer games than he used to. and we were kind of talking about that, about how like it's not just that they've been losing, it's not just that they've been losing at home, it's not even just that they've been bad, it's all the same guys.
Yep.
It's the same team we've been watching, but it's like guys that I want to love who are driving me insane, you know?
Yes.
And that's just so much worse than being the normal kind of bad, right? It's so frustrating. And so yeah, I think I don't know that it's too loyal necessarily, but I think
there's something in that.
There's something to be said for new blood. There's something to be said for changing things up for the sake of doing it. And I think if there's any kind of fear in the organization that we don't want to treat our legends this way, you know, it's tough. It's a tough line to toe, but lots of clubs have had to make painful decisions about legendary players and coaches, and, you know, they've been able to maintain those relationships. And, you know, I think the Sounders would be able to do it as well. That doesn't mean I'm saying that Adrian has not fired Brian purely because of loyalty, right? Like, I'm not sure I think firing Brian is the right decision either. I think that anytime things get bad, people just assume, well, if you change the coach, it'll be fine, right? And I don't think that's the case. But I do think Brian has probably lasted longer here than he would at a lot of other clubs. Good, bad, or indifferent. Like, I think that's probably the case.
I mean, I also think with Brian, especially, it's hard to make a honest assessment too, because there's not a lot of coaches who have won as much as he has won, and that does buy you a lot of. The reality is that does buy you a lot of goodwill. Like, that's just how it is. Like, you win 2 MLS Cups and a CCL trophy. You know, basically, you're talking about the only other coach that's done anything close to that is Bruce Arena.
Yeah.
And Bruce Arena wasn't getting fired a whole lot either.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Galaxy had some seasons where they were this bad for the first chunk of the season. You know?
Totally.
So. All right, next one is from Interpersonal, and we've covered some of this, but I think there's also some different angles to it that could be interesting. For the last year and a half, the Sounders have been mostly sustained by road game points. From 2023 to now, Seattle is 7th worst in the league on home points per game. This was before the RSL game, so I'm assuming that's either stayed static or gone down. 5 of the 6 coaches below them lost their jobs in that time. Only Vermes survived, and who knows for how much longer. He will be coaching Sporting KC long after I am dead in the ground. The team's home goal scoring has been woeful for over a year now, and the worst in the league over the last 12 months. Despite a second place finish last season, attendance continues to decline to alarming levels. Road points may push the team up to the standings, but home failures kill attendance revenue. It seems like ownership is feeling that lack of revenue. At what point does achieving playoff position matter less than a roster and home style that is actively hemorrhaging customers? Are Brian or Craig vulnerable if it does not improve?
It's an interesting question. Essentially, what he's asking is, have he's if I were to sum up, he's basically illustrating how bad the Sounders have been at home, and it's been really bad, at least from a entertainment value perspective. And can your home form specifically get you fired? I don't know. It's a relevant question. I suspect not. I suspect there is. If the Sounders somehow keep winning enough road games that their home performance is rendered less important, I doubt that's going to get Brian fired. I doubt that's going to get Craig fired. But it's an interesting conundrum, because you're right. It's not as simple as your total points. There is something to be said about entertaining your home fans and the revenue that you lose when your fans aren't entertained and they don't feel like it's a good product. And those are all totally relevant questions. But if it's a simple question of, is that going to get Brian or Craig fired? I don't think it is. I think they're going to be judged on I think that a lot of people feel like the home performances are a fluke, because it doesn't feel like there's a good explanation. Why have they been so much worse? Why does it seem like they've been so much worse at home? than they have been on the road. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know how you solve for that. Like I'm not sure that there's a good example of a team having such significant struggles to score at home, but not being near. Like there's a lot of teams that have struggled at home,
Right.
but they're usually just bad teams, and that's clearly not the case here. Like the Sounders are not just a objectively bad team anywhere they go play. They do seem to be worse at home, and I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, there are definitely teams who, if you're a very good team and teams like to employ a low block against you at home and just try to play for the point, maybe the drop off from your home performance to your road performance isn't going to be as high. I think we've kind of seen Sounders teams like that before, where they were very, very good at home, very, very good on the road, but not quite as elite as you would like them to be at home.
Yes,
because of the way teams played against them.
Yeah,
but this level of complete impotence at home versus, I think, a pretty decent, pretty decent team away is, I don't want to say like a complete fluke, but the degree to which it persists, I think, is not purely explainable by process or performance, right?
I mean, they had more road points, I think, last year than home points. That's just not.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's bizarre. I mean, I think that they are uniquely vulnerable, not uniquely, but they are much more vulnerable to certain tactical setups than some other teams. But I think a lot of that is just the not to get back to Raul, but a lot of that is just complete lack of scoring from their forward position. So I don't know. I definitely think that you're right, that it's not going to be the criteria on which Schmetzer or Weibel are judged, but I could see it feeding in so much to fan dissatisfaction that it sort of indirectly becomes, part of an eventual parting of ways.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought exercise. This is from Buttle. Have you spent any time watching Nico at Orlando? I still like rooting for him. In the few games I've watched, I'm always happy when he is involved in Orlando scoring a goal. Any thoughts on his playing style over there or how he's doing?
I haven't watched a ton of him. I've watched a little bit. I've watched anytime the highlights pop up, I'll definitely watch him. What I have seen and just looking at the numbers, he seems like he's pretty much the player he was last year, which I'm not saying that the Sounders should have re-signed him or that it was a mistake to let him go. But he would be nice to have on this team right now. I think it's fair to say, but he's certainly not setting the world on fire. I mean, he scored 1 goal.
He's got 5 assists.
I mean, he's I think it's 2023 Nico. He's probably got another year like that in him, I would guess. I don't know. Certainly not the player he was at one point in time. But yeah, I'm happy he's having success. I will say I wish that they could have found a way to bring him back. I don't know exactly the number he's on in Orlando, but I think I would have been okay with it here.
It's like I think like 800 or something like that.
Yeah, that would be fine. But I also don't. I think that the approach the Sounders took to that situation was the right one, of just saying, look, we got to figure out where we're at before we have those conversations. And once they made that decision, it just wasn't happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting thing about him this year is he started off sort of not really as a automatic starter, and he came off the bench in roughly half of his first 10 or so appearances, but he's consistently starting now, and he's consistently going close to 90 minutes. Yeah. So, and what's funny is his first. And I guess it's also worth noting that he's got 5 assists. They come in 2 games. So, and one of them came off the bench where he only played 18 minutes and picked up 2 assists. So it's been kind of a funny season for him. I would not say that he's a player who would necessarily, I don't know that the Sounders are necessarily better right now. And frankly, even if they were marginally better, I don't know if they are better off long term if he had stuck around. I'm glad that he's doing well. I don't have any animosity toward, like, I don't begrudge him any of his success, but I also am not pining for his return.
Right. I think that if the Sounders were having anything unlike the season they're having, I wouldn't even have said that as a joke, but
Right.
This next one is from the Joshua. If the Sounders won the Open Cup, would the vibes change? If they won the Open Cup, would that be considered a successful season?
The vibes would change, I think.
Yeah.
I think there would be a lot of people really excited. Like, okay, so let's just tease this out. So they win, they would have to beat Sacramento coming up, and that's on July 9th, and then they would host presumably LAFC at Starfire. If they beat LAFC at Starfire, that alone, the vibes will be immaculate.
Yeah.
It will. There's no scenario where they beat LAFC at Starfire and it won't feel like one of the great, like, you'll feel like you had to have been there kind of thing. Again, This is assuming, like, we're going on the thought process of, like, assuming that they win this thing. And then they have the final. That final might well be played at Lumen Field. It could have 40,000. They might have 40,000 people there. I don't know, 35, 40,000 people. It'll be a loud, fun environment. Yes, the vibes will be a lot better. Like, if we're assuming they win, the vibes will improve.
Yes.
They could have lost, even if they lose every league game in between those two things, the vibes will be better than they are right now, because winning trophies feels fucking awesome.
Yep.
And that's what this club is about. Okay. Will that make it a successful season? I don't know. I don't think it automatically makes it a successful season.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. The thing about a cup run is that it's fun. It's worth celebrating on its own merits.
And then it ends. And
it's a extremely small part of a much longer season. And so, yeah, it's a blast. I will feel great if they win the cup. Practically, it'll be great to guarantee Champions League. I think still, right? That hasn't changed yet.
Yeah.
But I think if they finish 10th and win the US Open Cup, it's really hard for me to say that's a successful season. Because ultimately the thing that matters is the league. And
if you don't get to the playoffs,
yeah,
you can't. Like, winning Champions League is the biggest trophy you can win, and you can call that a successful season even if you don't make the playoffs, because it's the biggest trophy you can win.
Yes,
basically.
Yes,
the Open Cup is not the biggest trophy you can win. I think you can make a pretty valid argument that it is the fourth or fifth most biggest trophy you can win. And if you don't make the playoffs, if you win Open Cup and don't make the playoffs, it's going to feel like like you're going to have a really hard time convincing anyone. Like, it doesn't even matter if I call it a successful season, no one will consider it a successful season.
Right. Nobody that covers the league is going to say that the Sounders had a good year.
No fan. I don't think no fan. Yeah. No fan that had to sit through the rest of the crappy season is going to call it a successful season.
No, I think if the Sounders win the US Open Cup and also go on a run and end up finishing 4th or 5th in the West.
Yeah. Different.
Whereas if they do that now, I don't know that I feel as great about the season, right? But if they can do that while also winning a trophy, yeah, that's sure. So it raises it gives you like 15% on the progress bar to successful season, I would say, which is a pretty good chunk, but
Yeah. All right.
Yep, this one's yours. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to G on E. Wants to know what are the reasonable expectations for the next two signing windows? The title really says it all, but given the context that there are only two more signing windows before the Club World Cup, what should we expect to see from these two windows? The team is currently constructed, albeit without Pedro de la Vega, has looked second best in the majority of their matches thus far. Given the increased level of the competition, that needs to be some turnover and acquisition to raise the level of the team. Trying to make all the changes necessary in one window seems like a monumental task and leaves little room for contingency planning at the event something going wrong. Key areas to improve seem to be the 9-10-6. JP really hasn't looked back since coming back, or right wing / wing back. I just will say, I'll let you ask the question. I think I broadly agree with what this person is saying.
Yeah, so the 9 I think is obvious. I think that I would like to get Jordan enough games there, before they make that signing, just to see. And I don't think he's had enough games there. But I think
none.
Well, he played a couple of games early this year at the 9,
but
right?
not really. He was playing with Raul as the 10,
yes,
or whatever. It was a 2-striker setup,
and he has, he's scored. I actually looked at this earlier today. And I think he scored 26 goals as a striker in MLS. So it's not like he doesn't have a little bit of a track record there. But I digress. I think that the pressure is there to replace Raul with another, with a 9, and I don't have any serious concerns with that. I think JP has not been the same player since he came back, but he's still a very good MLS midfielder. But I do think it's time to replace him, right? Like, I think that one of the things that we have learned over the last few years is that there's a lot of risk in extending guys in that age range, and I will defend their decision to do it in that context, in the situation they were in at that time. I think it was the right decision, even if it hurts now. But they are not in the same situation. They are not playing for a CCL title. And so I think it's just time to make some of those difficult decisions. The one that and maybe this is just pedantry, I'm not convinced that the Sounders need a 10. I think that the idea is that Pedro de la Vega is the 10, and I think he has to be given the opportunity to fill that role. I think that, he's not going to line up as an attacking midfielder where Nico did and play that way, but I think he's the primary creative force. That's the idea of him. So I wouldn't, I definitely, I think another 8 would probably be good, a more creative midfielder that's not necessarily like a center attacking midfielder. But I think I generally agree. I think I kind of want to see how Reed Baker Whiting fits in before we talk too much about fullbacks. Yeah. So, yeah. And yeah, I think they need to do that, or I think they need to do all those things over the next 2 windows. I think it's feasible they make one of those signings in the summer, and I don't expect either one to be a DP signing unless something dramatic changes. But I wouldn't be shocked to see them either bring in a 6 or, another TAM level midfield player. I kind of want to see Atencio at the 6 too. I just there is a part of me who thinks it could in some ways be a blessing in disguise if all the wheels come off and they just kind of try to figure out what they have in some guys before they make
I wouldn't mind seeing Josh and Obed get an extended run together as a defensive midfield pairing. I would anyway.
But I think generally they need to make 3 signings that are going to be players you expect to start. At least one needs to be a DP signing, and I think one of the others needs to be a TAM signing, and they all need to be impact players. And if they're not bringing Rusnak back, they probably need to make 4 signings. So, all right. First one was from Boomstick 315. Last one's also from Boomstick 315. And it's not about the Sounders. We'll go out on a note not talking about Sounders. Unlike other MLS versus Liga MX defeats, the Crew are much bigger spenders compared to Pachuca, or elements of the cap system other than raw spending holding MLS back. It's just the nature of a knockout game, or are there other places MLS is falling short that don't get as much attention? There is some added context. Most estimates put the Crew at 40 to 50% higher in terms of wage spending. And then also the Crew spend a lot more in the transfer market than Pachuca, who tend to sell rather than buy.
Yeah. So this is one of those losses that sort of turns the narrative on its head, which is it's not as simple as spending stupid. Yeah. That's sort of been the calling card, the explanation that magically dismisses MLS's struggles with Liga MX. And I think what Pachuca this loss illustrates is that it's it's not as simply as just being outspent. Now, Monterey spends a lot more than MLS teams. Tigres spends more than MLS teams. America spends more. There are big spending teams in Mexico, and they are good. They're very good teams, but that's not the only problem. The other problem is that Mexico still has a much more robust, at its best, like their best talent developers, which is what Pachuca is, are still producing players at high level players at a better clip than MLS teams. They are better at identifying sort of like, I think they have a better scouting apparatus in South America, and they're doing a better job of finding sort of undervalued assets in South America. I don't know that Pachuca is super indicative of the Mexican club system as a whole. Like they have seemed to punch way above their weight consistently in Mexico.
Yeah.
So I don't know that this particular loss does not fall quite as neatly into the larger narrative. And it's funny because the Crew beat the big spending teams they played, and then they got tripped up by a kind of lower spending team. I don't know that. I'm not sure what the takeaway from that. Like, I don't know how you fix that. Like, sometimes I think this is more of one of those things where, because MLS has not done a good job of competing dollar for dollar, there are times where there's exceptions that sort of like throw everything out the window. I don't think this one though is one that you can take away. Like, Pachuca's just does the stuff they do well better than anyone else in the continent.
Yeah, they're a model club in a lot of ways, for any league. But yeah, I generally agree. Like, I think that I would add, because I don't think you touched on this, I think the distribution of salary is a key thing. I would be shocked if anybody Pachuca has on their team is making like a DP level wage.
Right.
But everybody's making, TAM level wages, right? And I do think that matters. But yeah, I mean, I think like an MLS team that stocks their team with really good academy products, and has a couple of veterans, and they could have that same model and do pretty well.
Yeah, I mean,
in a competition like this.
This is not the most up to date information. This is from last year, but if you look at Pachuca's salaries, you have 3 guys that are making or 4 players that are making roughly $1 million, and then a few more that are making, $800,000 to $900,000. But it looks a lot like a low spending MLS team roster. Like, it's not like there's nothing on here that says that an MLS team could not structure their roster exactly like this. But what they're also good at picking and choosing which, where to spend money, and it's a good team.
Yeah, they're just really well run. I think also worth noting too, like when the Sounders played Pumas, it's not like there wasn't really that much of a salary discrepancy. I mean, I know we did the math at the time, but I think they were roughly even in terms of what they were spending on their roster.
We actually had a more valuable roster. I think we may have actually. I don't know if I ever actually compared the actual roster spend, but for sure the Sounders spent or had their like transfer market value was higher.
Right. And I think the gap was, I think, pretty significant over 2 legs, so
right.
It doesn't always turn out the way that the higher spending MLS team loses in the Champions League final.
Right. But all right, well, that's it. That's what we got.
Yeah. Nice breezy Q&A show.
Yeah, just a solid hour of mailbag, of cleaning out the mailbag. But once again, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for supporting Sounder at Heart. This has been quite an endeavor. We have some. We will hopefully next week we'll be sharing some kind of expansion news and things that the Sounder at Heart universe is expanding a little bit, and we'll be able to share that next week. I think people will enjoy that news. But this has been great. I hope people are really into. We just finished a survey that came back really positive, frankly. So glad to hear that. But if people have feedback they want to send us, please hit us up. support@sounderatheart.com. Should be relatively straightforward way to remember that. But if you want to get involved in the mailbag episodes, get on our Discord. You can get into the Discord by being a member at the $75 a year level or better, or higher, I should say. And with that, I guess I'll get out of here. I am Jeremiah Oshan signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. This is Nos Audietes, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.